Thank you, Josie. Hello, good afternoon. I feel almost at home here because that ground over there was the first place I ever went to see a professional football match back in 1971. And I went to school in a place called Wellington Grammar School, which is now in a place called Telford. Did you know it at all? And so I'm almost like a local boy. So I'm coming back to my old haunts, if I can use that word, in such a erudite company. I'm going to start talking about the VLE being undead. It's great that I can come back to this with my colleagues here and revisit this, because we talked about the VLE being dead, and then we decided it probably wasn't. We opened the lid of the coffin, and it was kind of looking like that at us, you know, and so we thought, well, maybe it's not dead yet, but it's looking pretty sickly, and maybe it's, you know, maybe it's a parasite instead. And so my kind of premise here was to kind of start pointing at the coffin to start with. I've had several blogs that I've posted on this to try and develop my thinking on this. You probably know the two-fingered salute, some of you, where I compared the VLE to the French soldiers at Agincourt, all shiny and polished and professional, but they were defeated by a rat-tackled mob of people who were kind of struggling against all sorts of illnesses, but still managed to survive and defeat them. Which was the PLE. We talked about it being dead, we've talked about the Emperor's New Clothes. There's all sorts of analogies we've given over the last few months to the VLE, the institution of VLE. But the first thing I want to say is the VLE sucks. In other words, it's sucking the lifeblood out of the institution. You're paying a hell of a lot of money for it, when in fact you can do the same thing for free or very cheaply using other means. And another thing I want to say about this, and I know the time is short, is that it's not really a VLE at all. If we're going to call it a VLE, let's call it a vampirical learning environment. But let's not call it a VLE, because it's not really a learning environment. What it is actually is a content management system. It's a repository. It's where you dump stuff and get the students to come and look at it. This is the most common use of institutional VLEs in the UK and in other countries. And I know that for a fact because lots of papers are coming out on it showing that this is indeed the case. And the students don't like it. They find it unattractive, they find it boring, and they vote with their feet. I was speaking to a colleague the other day, and he said quite simply that lots of students come into the VLE to get their stuff out for their coursework, and then they might come back in once more to post a message, and they never come back again. So why are we spending so much money on tools that nobody uses, or very few people use? So it's a content management system, let's call it what it is. I'll still refer to it as a VLE because obviously that's what we know it as. It's difficult to communicate using these systems. It's difficult because a lot of them are just asynchronous to start with. There's very little live activity that goes on in most VLEs. I know that some of them have synchronous systems available, but it's like having a paper bag over your head and talking to someone else who's got a paper bag over their head. And it's very difficult for cohorts to communicate across with another cohort. The VLE system that's used in my university, for instance, it's compartmentalised. It doesn't foster good communication. We also find that it's impossible for students to communicate with people outside the university as well. After all, in some cases, we want to try and do that. We want to foster and encourage cross-fertilisation of ideas with other groups and outside groups as well. And you can't do that with most institutional VLEs. It stops it from happening. Difficult to navigate as well in most instances. Not a lot of visual cues in most VLE navigation systems. Some of them are confusing. Sometimes you have to drill down into a particular tool to use it and then come back out and go back through the menu system and back in again. It's often very difficult to work your way around, and lots of students flounder and find themselves on the rocks. It also locks you in. Most universities are locked into a contract which is costly, and then they rely on the people who are creating the VLE and selling it to you to bring the new updates on, and that's often too late for the university year, for the academic year. So you're locked into a contract, and you can't change much in it either. It's not very flexible. It's certainly not very personal, and so therefore, if we're looking for personal learning approaches, the VLE is not the way to go. The tools themselves. Some of them are quite boring, some of them are quite clunky, some of them are quite good. But I tell you this for a fact that most students like to use the tools that are outside the VLE to create their content, to social network. to write things and post them up and to get other people to come in and comment on them and so on, to post up their photographs, their videos. They're using YouTube, they're using Flickr, they're using Facebook. Those are the tools that they prefer because they're colourful, they're sexy, they're easy to use, and there's such a population out there that isn't restricted by the walls that we put around the walled garden of the VLE. So the tools in the VLE look really old and clunky. In fact, I would go as far as to say that the VLE is about 10 years out of date now. It was great when it first started because it gave us a platform to develop and a platform to launch from and to promote e-learning and so on. But at this point in time, when we're looking at things like user-generated content, personal learning environments, and the like, what we're doing in effect is we're going backwards in time rather than forwards. The VLE is not personal. One size does not fit all, but we're finding that most VLE content is sequential, modular, firewalled, and very, very boring indeed, and the students tend not to enjoy using it. I'm rushing through these very quickly.
Good.
The idea behind this is that we are locked in. It's a firewall situation. It's a walled garden situation. And once you're inside it and you're locked into that contract, it's difficult to get out of it. I'm using this picture to depict for you what I call shovelware. Most lecturers, when they come across the VLE for the first time and they're expected to populate it with content, what they tend to do is they tend to panic because they don't know anything about how to use it, or they've had bad experiences with it before and they retreat from it. The most that they will find themselves doing is shoveling face-to-face content across into the VLE and hoping it will work. And of course it doesn't patently. The idea behind shovelware is that this is another costly mistake that most lecturers find themselves recreating, simply because they haven't got the time or they haven't got the energy, and they certainly haven't got the knowledge of how to use the VLE effectively. The VLE, in effect, is too complex a tool for most people to capitalise on in terms of their academic prowess. And finally, I'm going to just make a point that even Illich made back in 1971 when he talked about funnels. Most educational systems, he said, are like funnels. You're funneling people in a particular direction. It's very behaviouristic, it's very sequential, you're making everybody do the same thing at the same time, it's very homogenised, and in effect, it's not effective for personalised learning. He said what we should be doing is going for the learning web instead. But bearing in mind this was in 1971, at least 20 years before the World Wide Web, I think that was pretty damn prescient herself, to decide that we needed webs of people that could connect with each other and share their expertise together. This is what is happening on Web 2-based technologies now, but we are in danger, using VLEs, of taking the web and converting it back into a funnel again. That's my big argument for you to consider today. Do we want funnels, or do we want a freedom and liberty and emancipation of the web? Don't ignore the elephant in the room. It's liable to be a white one. All right. And finally, it's sucking your lifeblood. I've got some cloves of garlic here to ward off the evil vampire learning environment. Anyone wants one? Anyone want one? Keep your hand if you want one. No, nobody wants my garlic? You might need it later on in the discussions. It's there for you to pick up if you like. I'll just say this, that's my final comment. I've just come back from a meeting in Brussels yesterday where we sat with a consortium of 8 European universities, and we have a new project funded by the EU for the next 2 years which will discuss and explore and evaluate the idea of user-generated content as the future of higher education. Students creating content, students evaluating their own content, and working with the tutors in conjunction with them to create content that you learn from. How do we evaluate it? How do we measure it? How do we harness that, if that's the right word? That, to me, is going to be the future of higher education. And it's not going to be within the VLE.
Thank you very much, Steve.